Okay, so have you ever been like in one of those situations where, the stakes feel really high?
Oh, yeah.
Like maybe negotiating a salary or, um, trying to smooth things over with like a neighbor after you've had some kind of disagreement.
Right.
It might surprise you, but those skills that like FBI hostage negotiators use to, save lives
Yeah, yeah.
can be incredibly helpful in those everyday kind of sticky situations.
Welcome to the deep dive, where we take one really interesting book, and today we're talking about Never Split the Difference, and we pull out all the essential insights so you can quickly get up to speed.
And in this book, Chris Voss, he's a
Mhm.
former FBI hostage negotiator.
Right,
He offers this like fascinating perspective on how to use negotiation tactics that are grounded in like a deep understanding of human emotions.
right.
And today, our goal is to like give you this direct route to mastering those powerful principles.
Right.
So you can finish this deep dive feeling like you've gotten practical knowledge, a new way to look at negotiation, and
Hmm.
some of those, satisfying aha moments without feeling overwhelmed by a ton of information. Okay, so the book opens with this scenario, and it's pretty eye-opening.
Yeah.
So just imagine Chris Voss, this seasoned FBI agent, is suddenly thrust into like a simulated hostage negotiation.
Oh, wow.
The catch is that the people he's up against, demanding $1 million for his son, are actually negotiation professors from Harvard Law School.
Oh, wow. So like a real clash of, expertise and styles.
Exactly. It's this amazing contrast. You've got a guy with real world experience, life or death situations
Right.
going head to head with like the academics of negotiation theory.
Right, the people who've studied it but never been in the trenches.
Right. And you could just picture like that rush of adrenaline, even if it's a simulation,
Yeah.
and that stark contrast in their backgrounds.
I mean, you've got Voss with his practical experience, and then you've got the professors with this like purely intellectual approach.
Right. And this kind of sets the stage for the book's big idea.
Absolutely.
Voss realizes pretty quickly that these typical negotiation strategies, the logical problem-solving methods that you often hear about at those top universities,
Mhm.
the focus on getting to yes,
Yeah.
they don't quite cut it when you're dealing with people's emotions, which, let's face it, can be messy and unpredictable.
Yeah, it's not always rational.
So you have this interesting situation where the FBI, kind of ironically, as Voss points out, ends up developing this approach that's deeply rooted in psychology,
Mm.
counseling, crisis intervention.
Wait, they're becoming therapists?
In a way, yeah. So
Yeah.
while the academic world's focusing on things like game theory, economic models,
Right.
the FBI is becoming surprisingly incredibly good at using empathy.
It's really a shift in thinking.
Right. And that leads us to the central point. Negotiation isn't just about logic, it's about emotional intelligence.
So it's not just about the facts and figures.
Exactly. I mean, think about a hostage negotiator.
Yeah.
They can't meet a bank robber halfway, right?
Yo, of course not.
They need everyone to walk away safely, and that requires a different kind of win.
It's about understanding and influencing emotions.
Right. It's almost like emotional intelligence, but dialed up to 11.
Voss really breaks down the core techniques that make this approach so effective.
Right.
Things like active listening, where he talks about things like mirroring, strategic silence, and using a late night FM DJ voice.
Right, right.
And then tactical empathy, which includes labeling emotions, and even something called an accusation audit,
Mhm.
which sounds a bit intimidating, but is actually really useful.
Oh, yeah.
A big principle he stresses is that you should aim for real understanding
Right.
and getting to that "that's right" moment
Right.
rather than just a quick yes. He also really emphasizes the difference between what someone might say they want versus what they really need.
Yeah, what's really great is the way the book is structured. It's perfect for someone who wants to like absorb the information quickly but thoroughly.
Yeah.
So each chapter starts with this compelling hostage negotiation story from Voss's own experience.
Yeah.
And then he breaks it down, what worked, what didn't, and the key part why. And then to make sure you can actually use all this, each chapter ends with practical case studies from everyday life.
Okay.
So you can see how these techniques can help you negotiate a better price on a car, or navigate a tough work situation, or even just resolve like disagreements you might have at home.
So it's not just for hostage situations.
No, it's really applicable to like everyday life. He even includes a negotiation one sheet in the back of the book. It's like this condensed cheat sheet of all the key tactics.
Sounds very handy.
Right.
Okay, so let's dive into that first technique, mirroring. Voss basically describes it as imitation.
Right.
In the psychology world, it's also called isopraxism. You've probably experienced this. Think about when you're talking to someone who's really enthusiastic, you might find yourself like mirroring their energy.
Yeah, like subconsciously.
Yeah, maybe even their hand gestures.
Right, right.
And this kind of mirroring happens all the time, sometimes without us realizing it. We subtly copy each other's speech patterns, body language,
Uh,
vocabulary, even the tempo and tone of voice to build rapport and signal like we're on the same page.
yeah.
And it happens with humans and even other animals.
It's fascinating, right? Like a subconscious connection.
Yeah.
And Voss points out that there's a real biological reason for this. We're kind of hardwired to be suspicious of what feels different
Hmm.
and drawn to what feels similar or familiar, like that whole birds of a feather idea.
Right.
So mirroring is a subtle way to signal that, hey, we're connecting here. We're on the same wavelength.
And it's interesting because the FBI's actual definition of mirroring is so simple.
Yeah.
You just repeat the last 3 words of what someone said. Sometimes it's just the most important 1 to 3 words.
Okay.
And Voss refers to this as like the closest thing they have to a Jedi mind trick.
Oh, wow.
It's simple to do, but the impact is really powerful.
So just by repeating their words, you're triggering something in them.
Exactly. You trigger that natural mirroring instinct, which encourages them to talk more, to elaborate and keep that connection flowing. It's like you're saying, tell me more, without actually saying those words.
Right, right.
And there was this really interesting study done by a psychologist named Richard Wiseman where he was looking at waiters.
Okay.
And he compared the waiters who mirrored their customers to waiters who used positive reinforcement, like giving compliments.
Okay.
And what's fascinating is that the waiters who mirrored their customers got way bigger tips,
Oh, wow.
which suggests that this technique is actually even more effective than, being overly positive when you're trying to build rapport with people you don't know.
So it's almost like a deeper level of connection than just saying nice things.
Exactly. It's more subtle, more powerful.
Right. And to show how mirroring can work in like a high-pressure situation, Voss talks about his very first hostage negotiation.
Yeah, this is a great story.
It was a bank robbery back in 1993, and the hostage taker, Chris Voss, was very unpredictable. It was a tense standoff. So Voss is on the phone trying to de-escalate the situation.
Right.
And meanwhile, investigators are working behind the scenes. They managed to identify Watts through his car registration.
Smart.
Right. So during these intense calls, Voss doesn't even know the exact location of the hostage inside the bank.
Oh, wow.
Or even if Watts can hear him clearly.
Yeah, because it's probably chaos in there.
Exactly. But he starts using mirroring, just repeating the last few words Watts says.
Just to keep him talking.
Right, to keep that connection going.
It makes sense. And what's interesting is what was happening between those phone calls.
Yeah.
Apparently, Watts was doing some really strange things. He was hiding cash inside the bank walls
Okay.
and even burning piles of money in front of the hostages.
Oh, wow. That's bizarre.
It seemed so irrational, but in Watts's mind, he was trying to fool the police or something.
Yeah,
It was
well.
really strange and delusional.
It gives you like a glimpse into the mind of someone who's not really thinking clearly.
Absolutely.
Right. And finally, the hostage, Bobby, comes out.
Okay.
Voss had given him specific instructions on what to do. But when Bobby emerges, his first question is, where's Chris?
Oh, interesting. So he wanted to see Watts.
Yeah. He wanted to be taken to Watts. And this was a crucial moment
Why?
because it showed that it was just a two-man operation,
Okay.
which contradicted what the commander on scene had told the media.
Oh, wow.
They'd said it was like an international gang.
Right. That changes things completely.
Exactly. And Voss really believes that mirroring helped to keep Bobby engaged in the conversation.
Right.
And maybe, subconsciously, looking for that way out.
Interesting.
And for Voss, this was a huge learning experience. It really showed him how powerful emotions and dialogue can be,
Yeah.
even in those extreme circumstances.
Even when it seems like logic is out the window.
Exactly.
Okay, to bring this back down to earth a little bit, Voss gives this great example from the business world.
Right.
It's about a student who was dealing with a boss who was really stuck in his ways. The boss insisted on having paper copies of all these digital documents, thousands of them.
Oh, wow. Like in this day and age?
Yeah, it was kind of ridiculous. And when the boss said, okay, let's make 2 copies of all the paperwork,
Okay.
the student just mirrored back 2 copies
Okay.
with a genuinely curious tone.
Right. Like he was trying to understand.
Exactly. And later, when the boss said, it's fine, you can store it anywhere, the student, again, just mirrored anywhere. with this calm, concerned expression.
So what happened?
Well, both times the boss actually stopped and thought about what he'd said. After the anywhere mirror, he even changed his mind and said the student could put the copies in his office.
So basically the mirroring got the boss to, like, pause and reconsider.
Yeah, and that's the point. Mirroring is a way to non-verbally say, help me understand what you're thinking.
It's like a gentle nudge to get them to elaborate. Okay, so that leads us to the next technique, tactical empathy.
Okay.
And this isn't about feeling sorry for the other person.
Right.
It's more about actively trying to understand their perspective, their emotions, what's driving them.
So it's more strategic than just being sympathetic.
Right. It's about opening yourself up to their world, talking less, listening more, almost like you're sitting on a therapist's couch with them.
You're trying to get inside their head.
Exactly.
And it's interesting because there's a neurological basis for this.
Yeah.
Voss talks about something called neural resonance, where our brain activity can actually sync up with someone else's when we're communicating well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and a study at Princeton actually used fMRI scans and showed this happening. When communication breaks down, that neural synchronization disappears.
Fascinating.
And what's even more interesting is that the people who were better listeners in that study were actually able to predict what the speaker was going to say next.
Really? So it's like they were truly on the same wavelength.
Yeah, it shows that deep connection.
Wow. And that brings us to the technique called labeling.
Okay.
This is simply about identifying and acknowledging someone's emotion out loud.
So you're giving a name to their feelings.
Exactly. It's like you're saying, it seems like you're feeling emotion.
Okay.
And Voss describes this as a shortcut to intimacy. It's this incredibly efficient emotional hack that can save time and build rapport really quickly.
It's like you're acknowledging what they're going through.
Exactly. And it's especially powerful when dealing with someone who's tense or upset.
Right.
Bringing those negative emotions to the surface can actually make them feel less overwhelming.
So by saying something like, it looks like you're worried about going back to jail to a suspect,
Right.
you can diffuse the situation.
Exactly. It takes some of the power away from those negative emotions.
Okay.
And what about anger?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Voss says that while getting angry yourself is never really productive,
Right.
you can't just ignore someone else's anger.
Of course not.
So labeling can help de-escalate it. How so? By getting them to acknowledge their anger verbally instead of just acting on it.
Okay, so putting words to it can help them calm down.
Right.
Makes sense.
Voss has this story about a student, TJ, who had to collect money from people who were late on their football ticket payments.
Okay.
And TJ's first approach was very aggressive, very impersonal.
Yeah.
And nobody wanted to talk to him, no surprise there.
No, that makes sense.
So he changes things up.
Yeah.
He starts by acknowledging the fans' situation, their passion for the team.
Right.
And he labels the tough economic times that lots of people were going through.
So he's acknowledging their reality.
Exactly. And that has a big emotional impact. By recognizing their debt, but also their loyalty to the team,
Yeah.
and labeling the potential financial pressures they were facing,
Right.
he took the sting out of the whole situation.
Okay.
And the results were incredible. TJ was able to work out payment plans with everyone.
So just by acknowledging their emotions.
Exactly. It's really powerful.
It is.
And Voss tells this other little story about an instructor who was about to do this role-playing exercise with his students.
Yeah.
It was probably nerve-wracking for them. And before they started, the instructor just came out and said, in case you're nervous about volunteering, yeah, this is probably going to be pretty horrible.
He just put it out there.
Exactly. And it actually diffused their anxiety. More people volunteered than he even needed.
Oh, wow.
He compares this to the opposite approach, like saying, I don't want this to sound harsh, which can actually backfire and make that negative feeling even stronger.
So it's better to just acknowledge the negativity.
Right. By labeling it, you're taking away its power.
Interesting.
And then Voss talks about the late-night FM DJ voice.
Okay.
Think about that calm, soothing, downward inflecting tone of voice that you often hear from, like, radio DJs late at night.
Yeah.
It creates this feeling of trust,
Right.
like the person speaking is in control.
It's very calming.
Right. And that can be really powerful in, like, a tense situation.
Makes sense.
He tells this story about a student, Ryan, who was flying to Austin to finalize a big consulting contract.
Okay.
And he gets this aggressive call from the client representative with their CEO on the line, demanding to know why Ryan wasn't there yet.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a nightmare situation. They're even threatening to cancel the deal.
Oh.
Ryan's flight was delayed, completely out of his control.
Yeah, stressful.
So when he's talking to the ticket agent, Wendy, he makes this conscious decision to use the late-night FM DJ voice.
Okay.
He explains the situation calmly, and he labels his own feeling by saying, "It sounds like I'm the only one who cares about getting to Austin on time."
So he's not blaming her.
No, but he's acknowledging his frustration.
Right.
And Wendy was amazing. She went above and beyond, found him a seat on an earlier flight, even upgraded him to Economy Plus.
That's great.
And all of that in under 2 minutes.
Wow, just from the way he spoke to her.
Exactly. It shows how powerful a calm, controlled tone can be, especially when you combine it with some empathetic labeling.
So basically, with tactical empathy, you need to make sure it feels genuine, not manipulative.
Right, like a normal human interaction.
You're acknowledging their situation, their emotions,
Right.
and that makes them feel heard.
Exactly. And that encourages them to open up, to share more information with you.
It's about trying to see the world from their point of view.
Right, even if you don't necessarily agree with their perspective.
Empathy is about conveying that you're listening, not necessarily agreeing.
Exactly. And that can unlock valuable insights that you might not have gotten otherwise.
Okay, now let's talk about this seemingly counterintuitive idea.
Yeah.
Beware of the yes and learn to master the no.
That sounds strange.
Right. We're often told that getting to yes is the goal, but Voss argues that a quick yes early on can actually be a bad sign.
How so?
Because it might not be a real yes.
Right.
It might be fake. He uses the example of those telemarketers who just want to pressure you into saying yes right away.
Yeah.
And how that just makes you feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, you just want to get off the phone.
Exactly. Voss says that the real negotiation begins with no.
Oh.
Because saying no gives the person a sense of safety, control, autonomy. It's different from a fake yes, which is just a polite way to get someone off your back.
Sounds like a power move in a way.
It can be. Yeah.
Right. And he tells this story about how he really wanted to be on the FBI crisis negotiation team in New York.
Oh, yeah.
It was his dream job. He goes to Amy Bondurant, who is in charge of the team, and he's all enthusiastic, like, I want to be a hostage negotiator.
Okay.
And what does she tell him? Go volunteer to Suicide Hotline first.
What? Really?
Yeah, it seems kind of strange, right?
Yeah.
But it ended up being this pivotal moment for him. It opened his eyes to how powerful words can be.
Okay.
And all the emotional undercurrents in conversations.
So it's not just about the words themselves, but what's underneath.
Exactly.
Right.
And Voss makes this distinction between, like, Joe, businessman, who just pushes for that yes, and the FBI's approach, which is about understanding and even getting to know.
Okay, that's interesting.
He explains that there are actually 3 types of yes: commitment, confirmation, and counterfeit.
3 types. Wow.
And that counterfeit yes is more common than we think.
Really?
It's like that polite yes you give to get someone to stop talking.
Yeah.
And that doesn't really move things forward in a negotiation.
No. So how do you get to a real yes?
Voss says that skillful negotiators don't force people to agree. They gently guide them so they feel like the outcome was their own idea.
So it's about empowering them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you do this not by being pushy, but by making it okay for them to say no.
Makes sense.
And, Voss actually went back to Amy Bondurant after volunteering at the Suicide Hotline.
Okay.
And she was surprised that he'd actually done it.
Wow. So she wasn't just saying it to get rid of him.
No, it was real advice.
Yeah.
And it shows how few people really understand the power of no.
Right.
The power of no is that it makes the negotiator feel in control.
Okay.
It gives them the space to pause, to really consider the other side's position without feeling pressured to agree. Think about those telemarketer calls again. That feeling of resistance you get when they're pushing you to say yes.
Yeah.
Voss suggests this exercise. Next time you get one of those calls, write down the questions they ask,
Okay.
and you'll see how your discomfort increases as they push harder for that yes.
So the more they push, the more uncomfortable I feel.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And Voss credits his colleague, Marty Evelsizer, with really teaching him about the power of no.
Okay.
Marty was the FBI crisis negotiation coordinator in Pittsburgh.
Okay.
And she was very successful, but she had a supervisor who was, let's say, not very supportive.
Okay.
So when he'd ask Marty to take on more responsibility, stuff that would have been too much for her,
Right.
she'd strategically say no.
So she protected herself.
Exactly. It helped her stay focused and successful. To show how a no-oriented approach can work, Voss gives an example of a fundraising script.
Okay.
Instead of immediately asking for money,
Yeah.
it starts by letting the potential donor express their concerns about the current situation.
Okay.
So they're essentially saying no to the status quo.
Okay.
And this is more effective because it makes them feel heard and in control.
So it's about giving them a sense of agency.
Exactly.
Interesting.
The takeaway here is to actually invite your counterpart to say no to your proposals.
Okay.
It tells you what they really don't want,
Right.
and that can open up unexpected opportunities for agreement.
So no can be the starting point for a better solution.
Exactly. Voss talks about 3 types of no: protecting, correcting, and commitment.
Okay.
It's important to figure out which no you're hearing.
Right, because they mean different things.
Exactly. And he gives some great tips on how to hear no effectively.
Oh, what?
First, don't just focus on the word itself. Try to understand the reason behind it. You can even try to trigger a no early on, just to make them feel more comfortable.
How do you do that?
You could say something like, "Is now a bad time to talk?"
Right, just to give them an easy out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And be sure your tone conveys that you're okay with hearing no.
Okay.
You could even ask, "What are you against?" to really understand their concerns.
Oh, that's
So mastering no isn't about being negative.
Right.
It's about creating that space for honest communication.
It's about getting to the real issues.
Exactly. And that can lead to a much stronger agreement than a pressured yes ever could.
So it's a key skill for any negotiator.
Absolutely.
Okay, next up are these 2 simple words that Voss believes can transform a negotiation.
Okay, what are they?
That's right. He says the real goal in a negotiation isn't just to hear yes, but to get the other person to say, that's right.
Because it means something different.
Exactly. That's right. Signals real understanding and agreement on a deeper level.
Okay.
It's different from, say, you're right, which can often be superficial.
Right. It can just be a way to end the discussion.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
it's right is a breakthrough. It's a moment of genuine connection.
Right, right.
He illustrates this with a story about a college football player, Brandon.
Okay.
He was a linebacker who was struggling because he was trying to be too aggressive, taking on every block head on.
Okay.
And Voss, who was working with him, labeled his belief, saying, "You seem to think it's unmanly to dodge a block."
Okay.
And Brandon's immediate response was, "That's right."
Okay.
And by acknowledging that belief out loud,
Yeah.
it actually allowed him to change his approach and become a better player.
Interesting.
And then there's this story about a pharmaceutical rep who was trying to sell a new drug to a doctor.
Okay.
And instead of pushing the product, the rep focused on listening and summarizing the doctor's concerns.
Okay.
He really highlighted the doctor's commitment to his patients.
Right.
And that led to the doctor saying, "That's right," which was like a turning point.
Yep.
The doctor's defenses came down, and he was willing to hear more about the drug.
So it's almost like you're building trust by mirroring their beliefs and values.
Exactly.
And Voss tells another story about a student who was trying to negotiate a new position with his former boss.
Okay.
The student, instead of making demands, summarized the boss's situation and said something like, "So it sounds like you could approve my new position no matter which division it's in, as long as I'm at headquarters and can help you communicate better with the top brass."
The smart.
And the boss said, "That's right," which revealed what he really wanted: someone to bridge the communication gap.
So he was using that's right, to uncover the boss's real motivation.
Exactly.
And Voss even shares this email from a student who was just struck by how hard it was to understand what their bosses were thinking.
Right.
The student realized how valuable it would be to get to that's right, to improve communication at work.
Right. It can really bridge those gaps in understanding.
Ah.
So getting to, that's right, is about summarizing and paraphrasing what the other person is saying.
Okay.
Not just the words, but the emotions, the motivations behind them.
You're acknowledging their worldview.
Exactly. And that makes them feel heard and validated.
And more willing to work with you.
Right. Voss sums this up with a Chinese proverb: sleeping in the same bed and dreaming different dreams.
I like that.
It's a great way to describe how outward agreement isn't the same as true understanding.
Right. It's not enough to just get to yes or you're right.
You need to get to "that's right."
Yes.
That's where real connection and collaboration happens.
Okay, let's move on to this idea of bending their reality in negotiation.
Okay.
Voss brings in the principles of prospect theory, which was developed by these Nobel Prize winners, Kahneman and Tversky.
Okay.
And he talks about the cognitive biases that affect how we make decisions.
Right.
So at the heart of prospect theory is this idea that people are more afraid of losing something they have than gaining something of equal value.
Right, so we're naturally loss averse.
Exactly. And this plays a big role in negotiations.
Okay.
And then there's the power of anchoring,
Okay.
which is this tendency we have to really rely on the first piece of information we're given.
Okay, so like the first offer sets the stage.
Exactly. And Voss explains how using an extreme anchor, like a really high or really low offer, can actually change how the other side sees the whole negotiation.
Okay, so you're basically shifting your perception of what's possible.
Exactly. He tells this crazy story about a nephew who had to negotiate a ransom in Haiti.
Oh, wow.
The kidnappers started with this huge demand,
Why?
and the negotiation team told the nephew to ask, how can I even come up with that kind of money?
Okay.
And that got the kidnappers to lower their demand significantly.
Just by asking that.
Yeah, and made them reconsider. And then the nephew came back with this super low offer, like $3,000.
Oh, wow, so he went in the opposite direction.
Exactly. It shocked the kidnapper at first, but it totally reset his expectations.
So it's like you're changing their frame of reference.
And
Voss also gives an example from his own consulting work.
okay.
He quoted this high daily rate for a short project and then dramatically lowered it in a later conversation.
Okay.
And that lower price seems more attractive because of the high anchor he'd set before.
So it's all about perception.
Exactly.
And what about letting the other side anchor first?
It can be risky, but it could also work in your favor. Their first offer might.